Gospel reading from Mark. As soon as they left the synagogues, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the server felt better, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. But he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place and prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And they went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A friend in our church was telling me about an encounter she had recently that somewhat embarrassed her, but taught her at the same time. And that's everything, isn't it, really? I mean, learning through vulnerability. Well, she was in her car at a gas station on Northwest Highway when a man tried to wash her windshield, for a tip. Now, this is the sort of thing we're used to when we are traveling in a poor country and someone stops at a stoplight and wants to do that sort of thing. But here we were in Dallas, she thought to herself, and so she was a little bit initially annoyed because she didn't really need her windows washed, right? But she's trying to be a better Christian by being more awake to life in the moment, and so she stopped and she gave the man a dollar bill, telling him that she didn't need him to wash the windows, that he could just have it for free. And then she started feeling bad that it was so little, and she even had the thought immediately after giving it to him that this is another growing edge for her. She never gives enough, right? So she's been trying to figure out, I know this from conversations, how to be a better giver to the church. And here she was again giving so little, she thought. When you really meet Jesus, she scolded herself, you will wish that you had given more. But before she could drive away, shaming herself again the way she habitually does to herself, this is her pastor talking, don't you know? The man stopped her and looked her in the eye and said, "Bless you for your compassion." It touched her deeply. I was shocked, she said, because he seemed to have looked into my heart and blessed me for what I had thought of as nothing at all. Since I was only giving him $1, I was not impressed with myself. But he wasn't counting the amount of money. He was counting the fact that I had looked at him as a human being. And he was right. It had been pure compassion. I didn't want him to feel defeated or ashamed of his attempt to pick up a little extra money by doing something useful. I didn't value that in myself, but it seemed as if he did. During this season of Epiphany, we've been looking at ways that we can renew the Jesus movement in our time. And we've been following what Jesus did in Mark's gospel. Compassion was at the heart of it all. He began his ministry in Galilee, where we learn that he taught and he healed people of many diseases and he cast out demons. Now, we can dive deeper into that demon thing in a moment, but for now, get the big picture. Jesus' ministry was life-giving. He gave his life not only on the cross, but every step of the way toward the cross. And in doing so, he gave life to those that he came into contact with. He looked with compassion at people who were bruised and broken. His healing work was not simply to make them well for the moment, physically or mentally. It was to give them a taste of the full dignity of life that God intended for them from the very beginning of time and is bringing about at the end of time. This is his purpose. And it is to be the purpose of all of us who follow him. So the phrase that caught my attention from our text today from Mark's gospel is when Jesus says, "That is what I came out to do." Now, you probably think the language of coming out is what piqued my interest, right? And yeah, there's that, right? I mean, there is something to be learned from the struggle for authenticity that our gay and transgender sisters and brothers endure and the breakthrough it represents when they come out. Jesus had to be true to his own identity and mission, and he could not be captive to what other people wanted him to be or to do. And we all have this struggle at some level, don't we? Jesus apparently did as well. So we hosted a live stream event at our church this past Thursday night from the Riverside Church in New York City. It was called The Courage to Show Up, and it featured a conversation between the popular writer and speaker Brené Brown and the Black Lives Matter activist and podcaster DeRay McKesson. One of my takeaways was this: comfort is the enemy of courage, and we all tend to choose comfort over courage. Comfort, though, assumes that there is only so much life to go around, and our first job is to secure our share. Courage assumes an abundance of life. See, that it's available to all of us, and therefore we are able to give life freely to others, knowing that we will all have a share in it when we do. Comfort operates out of fear. Courage from love. Jesus could have had a comfortable life by paying attention to his own interests alone. But that wasn't who he was, or what he was called to be and do. It took courage for him also, to come out from his success in Galilee, from being a populist preacher in his own backyard. What he came out for was to be the Savior of the world, not just a local hero. And we see that in this scene where the disciples catch up with him early in the morning. He has spent a full night healing people and casting out demons and doing all of that work in Capernaum, and he goes to a deserted place to pray and to be alone and to meditate with God. The disciples come to find him and say, "What are you doing? Everyone is looking for you," as if to pull him back in there. But his time with God must have clarified for him that he couldn't limit his work to one town or one region. He tells his disciples that they have to go to the neighboring towns also to proclaim the message and to give life to others as well. This is what he came out to do. The mission of the church, is never just the mission to the church. It is that because we are God's people, but it is more than that because everyone else is too. Our healing mission, therefore, takes us outside our comfort zones and moves us into courageous encounters in the world. It takes us to places like Tanzania and to work with new partners like Peter Commanda. There you are. Now, see, we all love our kids, right? And we want them, among all the priorities that we have for our kids, one of the key things is that they get a good education. It's very important to us. But as followers of Jesus, we also care about other people's children. Because in the spiritual sense, there's no such thing as other people's children, right? Which is why we are advocating for good public education here in Dallas and in Texas. No one should be denied the opportunity to learn and flourish because they somehow lost the genetic lottery by being born to parents without the resources others have. God is the Father of us all. But even that's not enough. We don't just care about American children. We care about African children too, which is why we've helped to build a residential dormitory at a school in Tanzania so that girls who were regularly being, this is so hard to imagine, who were regularly being stopped on their way to school and molested can instead live and study and work together during the week in safety. And they will not have to bear the mental and emotional scars of abuse. They'll have healthy hearts as well as keen minds. This is life-giving work. As is giving to the Phil Strickland offering for world hunger. We who have food to eat and clean water to drink give to do the same for those who don't, and this is life-giving work. Well, let's home in a little on this story today, though, from Mark that, well, begins in a home. Jesus has just left a synagogue in Capernaum where he has cast out an unclean spirit from a man there. Immediately after that, and everything in Mark happens immediately, it seems, Jesus goes to the house of Simon and Andrew, his brother. Now, if you go to Capernaum today, you can actually stand in the ruins of a synagogue that was built over the ruins of the synagogue in which Jesus did this miracle. But if you just walk a few steps next door, you will find the ruins of the house of Simon Peter, where he performed this miracle. It's almost like a parsonage right there. They've turned it into a church now, and you can go into this church, and it has a glass floor so that you can look down onto the basalt rock walls that framed out the house and the rooms. You can see the rooms, in one of which Peter's mother-in-law lay suffering from a fever. Jesus goes into her, takes her by the hand, and lifts her up. And as soon as the fever breaks, she is healed, and it says she is able to serve them. That is, she then was able to resume life-giving work herself because life had been given to her. Mark then gives us a picture of the scene that ensues. The whole town gathers at the door, and people, every kind of illness are there, and Jesus cures many diseases and casts out demons. And then it says, he casts out demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. No one knows exactly why Jesus didn't permit the demons to speak. Commentators have various theories about it. Here's one thought of mine. for what it's worth. Most of us don't encounter people who are demon-possessed as if it's a regular experience in our communities. Now, I'm not going to say that I know that the people in Jesus' day that were said to be demon-possessed were really just mentally ill, but I will say that a lot of the characteristics are similar. And that even today, in a day of modern medicine, we talk of mentally ill people struggling with their demons. Now, is that literal or figurative? I don't know, But what they do is alter a person's sense of personhood. They take over a personality. They rob a person of the peace that should rule a heart and mind. Chronic depression is a black hole. Addiction to substances robs a person of the power of agency over one's life. People who have been molested or abused in some way, as well as those who have served in combat situations, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. You know that brain scans show damage because of it? It feels oppressive and immobilizing to people, and these people often speak then and act primarily out of their pain, as if the demons are speaking instead of them, and it causes havoc in their families and in our churches. And speaking of churches, a pastor friend told me recently that a study indicates that the people we preachers preach to regularly in our pews, an estimated 60% of the people in the pew suffer from some sort of PTSD that would show up in a brain scan. That's a lot of you, right? And that's demonic and real, whether the demons are literal or not. And by the way, we need to be honest about how much of that trauma in the church is caused by the church itself, instead of being cured by the church. Well, Jesus doesn't permit the demons to speak, I think, because he sees the true selves of the people beneath their illness. He doesn't just look at the presenting pathology. His wellness then replaces their illness. We live today in a time when God has allowed us to discover all sorts of means of combating diseases through medicine. And healing, I tell you, isn't a choice between prayer and medicine, as if they are somehow opposed to one another. They are both God's healing tools. But Jesus shows us that healing always involves relationships. Being up close and personal with people in love and compassion is what medical professionals do. People like doctors and nurses and chaplains and social workers and counselors and pastors. They treat the person, not the patient. They see the human being, not the illness. And that in itself is life-giving. And we can all do this, whether we are healing professionals or just run-of-the-mill Jesus followers. You too can be a faith healer. Whoa. When we forgive another person who has hurt us, that is life-giving work. When we listen to a person's truth instead of just wanting to tell our own, that is life-giving work. When we notice a person who was otherwise invisible to us because she is a woman or a person of color or a child or elderly or a person who is at the opposite end on the spectrum of our political view. That is life-giving work, because it means we are driving the demons out that have crowded that person's life, and we give space for grace to work. Which brings me back to what my friend said to herself. She was right, you know, even if she was being too hard on herself. When you really meet Jesus, you'll wish you had given more. More money, yes, that's always good. But more time and attention, more love and compassion too. The giving is of yourself, you know. This is the life-giving work Jesus came out to do. And it's what he's calling us out to do too, by the healing power of his Spirit at work within us and through us. Amen.